wherever you are, and welcome to the live stream. My name is Randy Apuzzo. Today we're going to be going over Next.js and wildcard routes. So basically the idea is using the Next.js JavaScript platform, which is React-based, to create wildcard routes and being able to do different things with the data. Looking at how we set that up in the code base, how we set up the file system, and how we play and get access to that data. So let's jump right in. First thing we're going to look at is the actual documentation. Sorry, just checking, make sure we're all good. The documentation here I'm going to post into the stream. Wildcard routes. And then also note that we are going to be working inside of the live stream examples repository, which we continue to work in, and there's a Next.js example here. When we continue to add different types, the examples will load up here. So you can see all the code that we work on, we push here. See the last push was 5 days ago from the last live stream that was working on fetching remote data. You can check that out in the history. All our live streams get recorded and posted onto YouTube. So today we're going to be going over looking at dynamic routes. And then after we do dynamic routes, we're also going to inspect a topic came up after the last live stream about using loading the page with data and then replacing it with fresh data. So we're going to go over that. So we'll go back into this use effect slash static props that we were working with before, just to cover some topics there. So all right, let's get into dynamic routes. Let's make sure that we got some little bit of music in the background there. Get it all tuned up. Listen to Stream Beats by Harris Heller, which is some good stuff. All right, cool. So jump into dynamic routes. So Next.js is really awesome because it provides a lot of routing for you out of the box that you don't have to worry about and set up and build custom routes. So dynamic routes are really important. So let's take a look at the file system we have here. We'll close out some of these. We'll open this up a little more. Get some of these files closed here. All right, and let's just look at the actual file system of Next. So the key thing about Next is this pages directory, and that's a special directory. There's going to be either app or a document. And this is what loads before everything else loads. So this is kind of like your loading application. This is your shell, which is the app. And then everything else that gets created, like fetching cookie test. If I'm good to go over here and just type fetching, it's going to automatically generate that route for you. So whatever you name something over here, it's going to find that route and it's going to default to this. And whenever there's a hard written path like this, let's call it a path, this page fetching, it's going to default, it's going to find that path first. So that even means when you have dynamic routing or you have something like Zesty set up where Zesty will load any content that you build and the remote CMS will load in Next.js dynamically, that will only apply if there's not a hard-coded file that's relative to that path that you're seeing. So that's kind of the basis of what's going on there. And so you got a few people tuning in now, so don't be shy, say hello in chat. If you have any questions, just go for it. You can ask questions. But we're going to look to stay on the topic of dynamic routes. So now we understand basic routes, just hard path, fetching, cookie test. If we go over here, the cookie test, we'll see we load that particular file. And I have this hello one. Again, we'll just demonstrate that one more time for hello. So if we want to create a dynamic route, you can see this one. This is the Zesty slug, and this is a dynamic route. I know look to see if a page exists in Zesty without 404ing. We're gonna create our own dynamic route from a separate path, but this one does come with every Next.js starter, and this is an example of how the actual file is named. So to create a dynamic route, we're going to start by making a folder, and I'm just going to call it dynamic. And now that's not going to do anything for me. If I go to dynamic, it's going to 404, right? Because there's nothing here yet. So in dynamic route, we can make another file. And how you set it up, so what you're doing with this route here is that the brackets is what's going to be passed to the file. So you could call this slug, you could call it like param, call it ID, for example. So now we have dynamic ID here. So it's going to look for the file path dynamic slash, say, like, it could be anything. I'm just going to put in a number here. But it's not happy with that. Let's build out a module. I mean a React component, excuse me. So export default function. I want to call it dynamic. Hopefully that's not taken. And we're going to return a div just to test it out. And if we go to here, look, now we're loading dynamic. So what it's doing is anything off of this that has a path part here, it's going to render that no matter what. So I don't know if numbers will work. Let's see. Yeah, anything I type there, numbers, strings, anything I want, right? So notice it's always just loading this dynamic part. So if we jump back over to Next, we could take a look at how we get the get that dynamic value. So you need to use the router from the Next router. So first we're going to import that router up top. We're also going to just properly import React as well. So in the docs it says you have to access use router, and then you instantiate router, and then you can access the value that you named off that router. So router.query, and what it's going to be looking for is whatever we named the slug. So the name we gave it was just ID, not PID in this instance. So we're going to say ID, and we're going to just write in our return body ID and see what we got. And notice dynamic. So this is great. So we're accessing the value here. Let's say hello world. Right, and you see that we're passing through that value. So that's as simple as it is. It's really nice. Like Next.js makes it really simple to set this up. Again, we'll just go through pages. You can create a folder, and then you can add the dynamic file in there, which is denoted by having square brackets. And within the square brackets is what the name of the param that you access is going to be. So if I call this silly name, right? Let's see if that works for me. Silly name. Will that work? There it is. So note we could name the parameter anything we want. So it could be relative to your application to give yourself a better idea of what's happening. You could see like in Zesty we just call it slug for the path, and that's a generic name. We could have named it Zesty, right? And it could return. So like for example, I could rename this to Randy, and rename how I access it to Randy, and Randy one more time. When I refresh, I'm still able to access this dynamic value. All right, so now what happens if we add the path? So right now our path looks like this. There's dynamic and then a value. So what if we add another value on top? What's going to happen? 4 fours. So if we want to get this value all the way through, you could add the triple dots. And that's saying that I'll get any path, right? And notice that what it's returning back to me now is that it takes this whole entire string and it gives you these parts here. So the triple dots will let you have any amount of paths. You can see it just outputting there. And note, like, that's how we built the Zesty dynamic one, is we have the .slug at the top level, so that way any registered route in Zesty will load. It's the same concept. So we're using the triple dot is what allows you to create any depth here. So we're going to go back to just having a single dots. And I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call it path part for the sake of, let's see, I'm not totally sure if the dash, I think the dash is not going to be friendly, so you can't use the dash here. I think we can get away with underscore. We can try that out. Let's see. Just a note. No, it's not happy with the underscore either. So let's just call it part or path. And path. May not like this either. Oh, it's because we got rid of the triple dots, excuse me. Let's go back and see if we can use the underscore then. So path part. Path path. Is path path a good name? Path part. Path part. And path part. There we go. And we're back to getting our dynamic path part. So hello world. So what can we do with this? Obviously, you could build a custom page. You could use this as a value to fetch something. If this is an ID, you need to fetch a blog post. If it was the name of a product and we had a relative endpoint to use that, we could fetch that, which is really important. That's how you could build kind of dynamic applications. So very simple to do. So if we want to have multiple layers of this, we can. So we could create a new folder, and I believe you can name the folder the actual other item. So we call this like ID. I'm going off memory here, so let's see if this works. And I'm just going to copy this as my base into here, and I'm calling this one ID. Alright, so this top level is going to load this dynamic hello world, and I'm going to modify this to just dynamic. So it'd be like second level dynamic page, and I'll say path part just to help see what's happening. Second level dynamic page, path part, and then over here we'll say third level or tertiary. And let's see if that loads here. So let's add a number to it. That did not work. Let's check. Let's check over here. Make sure that we're looking at it correctly. Next.js. Actively debugging. So we're going to be working on the live stream to have like a debugging mode and a chatting mode and a notes mode. That way we could just kind of improve the production of it and put in different modes. And I have this little thing called the stream deck that will let me do different sounds. Like, I don't know if you guys can hear that in the background, but we'll be able to switch between modes very easily going forward. But right now we're just debugging this particular setup. And I'm just seeing if you could name a like dynamic page folder name. Let's see. Pretty sure you name the folder the thing and have it be the index like so. But I thought that was the answer. Category slug, product slug. Pretty sure that's the way it was. It may just not be loading correctly. Let's just test that. So we have this dynamic which creates dynamic, one more level. Maybe it's competing. Let's see. So that one, I guess these would both be at the same level here. So we may want to rename this one. What we may want to do is, let's just play with it and see if we can get this to work. So I'll move that up here. And we're going to rename this folder to path part. And then we're going to name this one secondary. And then we'll rename this one to index. Let's see if this can work. Alright, so go to pull hello world. Okay, so that's getting second level dynamic page. So if you name the file, you name the folder the slug, and then it will default to the index. You can still access. And then if we go for another level for secondary, we're able to get that. So now we're on the tertiary level. So if you wanted to grab 2 levels of something unique, this is the setup you'd have. So, and I'm going to create another folder in dynamic just so you can see what's going on. Let's call it test. Move. Alright, just so you can see the actual breakdown. So I created a top level folder called dynamic. And then under that, there's a folder with that same, like that next naming convention with the square brackets, and that's how you can grab the actual name from your router. And then inside of that, we have Next.js. So it's going to default. So if I'm looking at the setup and I just go one level deep, dynamic, 1 slug deep, hello world, I'm going to load this index. And the index is tied off to the name of the folder, which is this square bracket path underscore part. And you can see that file here. So we access path part this way. So now if I want to go 1 level deeper, and let's just throw like some sort of integer in there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pretend that's like a post name. You could create another square bracket name, secondary, like this. And I named it secondary. I guess this should be tertiary. Let's rename them the way that they're. This will probably make it a little bit easier to look back at. Tertiary. I believe that's how I spell tertiary. Not a word you use every day, say every way. Alright, let's grab that there, tertiary, and then we're going to rename this path part to secondary. And we're doing that in reference to the actual path parts, so this will be secondary. And that means we have to update this index. Also, the reference this is secondary. There we go. Alright, cool. Refresh. Alright, so tertiary level. And if we drop back, we get the second level, and we'll say secondary level. Okay. So now we have 2 very dynamic names, so we could say, call this like, let's just call it 1, path part 1, and then 2, path part 2. And it's loading 2 different components. And they're both dynamic. So what if we want to get 1 out of here? Because if you look, we're just grabbing this 1 secondary component. I'm going to try this because it looks like it's deconstructed. Let's attempt to say, I guess on secondary we'd leave that, but on tertiary, can we also get secondary, tertiary with deconstructed props? Don't know if I can. I'm just making an assumption. If we can't, we'll look at docs. There we go. It is. So that did work. So always deconstruct your props, and that's when you can recognize deconstructed props here. So router is passing forth this secondary slug and this tertiary slug. And now we can have access to that both on our render, but more importantly in functions. If we were going to use either one of these to make a remote request to API, that would be very useful. So let's just improve the way this outputs. We'll make a little ordered list. Li, we'll say secondary level. Tertiary level. And am I spelling the word tertiary correct? We'll Google it unless someone in chat wants to fill me in there. Okay, cool. And then we'll go like this. Wrap in a strong just so we can see. So now we're accessing our path parts like that. 1, 2, say 2, 3. And now I'm able to access that and kind of change my page. So this could be anything I want now. I can just type gibberish here. So it's going to resolve to any page. That means that it's infinite, which is problematic, right? Because if you were to create, I mean, maybe you want it that way if you're creating some sort of like art project in code or something, makes sense. But if you don't have data to fulfill the page, that could be problematic, right? So that means that search engines would just kind of crawl through this forever because there's no bounds to what you could do with it, right? So how do we go about like telling the search engine to quit, right? Or tell the page to quit because maybe I only want specific things. Maybe I need this one, that this has to be a numeric, right? And this could be some sort of category, right? So let's see, how do we get this thing to quit out? And believe you can return, you can kind of quit out and then return a different component, like a 404 component like this, for example. So this one's called custom 404. And let's import that. So we say import custom 404 from pages/404. And let's say if, oops, let's give this a shot. So in the function body, we're going to check if tertiary, and say I think is numeric. I don't know if that is numeric. I'm not totally sure in JavaScript. Let's say check value is numeric. JavaScript. Let's see what we got here. Oh boy. Type of var number. All right, cool. Let's try that. So if type of the var, we're going to use tertiary here, is number. And it'll say not equals the number because that's where we want to quit. And then we can return, let's return our custom 404 here. Let's see what happens now. That may not be working. So this is a number. What if it's a string? Let's say I get rid of this line. Properly returning a 404, we go back to normal. I don't know if that check for number is correct though. So type of tertiary is equals number. Let's see, I don't know if I trust this particular one. Let's see if we can find something on. It's funny there's not just a simple way to check it for numeric in JavaScript. Parse int. Can we do that? I don't know if I trust that either. Let's see. If see if we can get away with this. Parse is that may not work either. ParseInt equals is not a thing. Let's see if this will work. Alright, cool. Alright, so it looks like we're loading our page. So if this is a string, oops, that's not a string. This is a string. No, it looks like that. that didn't work out either. Maybe a triple equals. Alright, let's try a different way to go about this. So we'll just say if the number is, how about this? If the number is less than 100, or yeah, less than 100, return the 404. So if we had a number 22, 404, but if this is 200, we get the page resolving. Alright, so just going back to here, we'll say, use custom logic to 404 the page when there is bad data. Cool. Put the render. So it could be done that way. So again, what we're doing is saying if tertiary, if the number is under the number of 100, we're gonna 404. So if this is 100, we should still load the page, but if it's 99, we're gonna throw our 404. That's 990. 404. 1 should 404. So this is how you can escape using dynamic routes. This is really important. And it's important because otherwise either you'd have a bunch of broken pages, or you'd run into a situation where like a search engine could crawl your website forever. Okay. We're going to send that code up. Git add. And we'll put that example and link to it. Dynamic page route example from livestream 8/16/22. Cool. And we'll restart our npm. Good. And let's go grab that latest commit there. I'll show everybody the latest updates. Cool. So very simple. Next.js makes this very easy to accomplish. Alright, so the next topic we're going to discuss, we're going to switch topics here. And we're going to discuss loading the page. So let's look at here. So a situation came up with somebody that we're working with that's running a program where they are deploying to another system that they can't control the cache of. And what's happening is that they're getting stale data because the cache that's building their page is using a cached endpoint. And because of that, their users aren't getting fresh data, which is obviously a problem, right? But the search engines still need to get data. So the question came up is, could we just use something like useEffect to paint the whole page? And yes, of course you could, but that means the search engines aren't going to see anything on page prior. So if the search engine hits your page, and JavaScript doesn't render, they're going to see nothing on the page. All right. But if a user, a human, is using their browser and hits your page, they're going to see the painted page. It's just kind of how it works. So you have to still program for robots, which is really important. And I guess it's only important if you expect your website to be on Google search engine, or Yahoo search engine, if that's even a thing, or Bing, any of the search engines, DuckDuckGo. So if you're expecting to be on a search engine, you need to have something on your page at the time of render. That's why like get static props and server-side rendering with Next is really great, because it'll generate the base page and then you could take the page over after the fact with JavaScript. So what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate an example of creating a page that has data already loaded using static or server-side props. We'll use server-side props because this is a server-side setup. And then we're going to change that data as the page loads. And with the purpose of accomplishing that, search engines get to see the page, but the user gets either personalized or updated data. So that's what we're gonna program right now. So let's jump into that. All right, to set this up, we're gonna set just up this regular page. So this, we're gonna call it like, let's name this one Stale Data Override. It's a really great name. Stale Data Override .js, and let's just export a function. Stale Data. This sounds like it'd be a great band name. Stale Data Override. Right. And that probably maybe is like math rock, or maybe heavy metal. And we'll just start by returning a div of a page. So now we have npm already running our Next application. We can leave that route and go to stale data override. Cool. And we have a page. Really need to go through and find where the semicolon is and get rid of that guy. I'm gonna build out a page here with JavaScript. With HTML, just so we have a little bit something better to look at here. So let's just style this guy up. Pretty sure we have access to Material UI in here, but I really want to stay away from using those to confuse the examples. So we're just gonna go like this. Padding. Let's go 100 pixels. Background gray. Doesn't look like that likes that. Let's see. That's because it's not styles. I believe it's just style. There we go. Cool. Let's chuck a nice big healthy margin on here. Stale Data Override. Yes, that's going to be Chloe's new band name. And Chloe is going to be the singer. And she's just going to scream really loud into the microphone. It's going to happen. You're going to see her live in Vegas. She's going to open for Drake. Alright, so let's just keep adding a little bit of styles here. A page. I don't need all this padding. A page. Cool. And we'll name this Stale Data Override Example. My stale data. This will be a paragraph. Cool. And let's lighten this gray a little bit. Shall we? Shall we take one of my favorite grays, the E8088 Classic. Nice subtle gray. Cool. Stale data override example. Alright, so now we're gonna add export. I wanna say, I don't know if it's default function is it get server side props, and I'm gonna need to cheat and see an example of this here. Export async function, get server side props. You can pass content. Let's just copy this as our base example. Can't remember everything. All right, cool. We're gonna ditch these and work from here, and we're gonna set up a an object called data, and we will make a paragraph. Let's just call it content. This is stale data loading from the server side render. I don't think I need to do that. Cool, and then here I think I go like that. So I say data.content and data.content. May not like that. Might need to go like this. Forget, I feel like I got caught in this last time. We had a great example. This is why these examples are awesome in fetching. Let's see, we go props content. Yeah, okay, so we're gonna follow that pattern. So just data, and that is like that. So data is this, props data. Cool. All right, so we're setting content. Let's pretend that we made a server-side request. Pretend to make a server-side request to get data here. So this is going to be our stale data, and it's going to be, and we're just loading it in here. So into content. So we look at our actual example here. Let's clean up our workspace here. Oh boy. Let's just get this loading here. All right. So stale data, we're using server-side props. That means at the time that this page is accessed by the client, when I say like somebody using a web browser, this already exists. This stale data is going to be loading. It's going to be built into the file. Same thing, if a search engine hits this, that's what the search engine is going to read. It's going to read this page as it is. All right, so how do we get this to dynamically change? By fetching information outside. So we're going to do that now. We're going to say import React from React, and we're going to need to use a couple different React functions to get this work, and React hooks particularly. So one of the hooks we're going to be using is the use effect hook. So we're going to import that, use effect, and we're also going to be using state as well, because state's going to be what changes the page and how we are actually dynamically change the data without being overly complicated with our render here. So let's just pull up use state React. I'll post this in chat. So the use state hook, and post this use state hook for React. Just watch out, chat. You get some links coming in, and they import the same way we're importing up here, React and use effect and use state. This one's use state. And then we're going to just copy the example for use state. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say, I'm going to call this and the word dynamic is super redundant, but just call it page content here, and set page content. So this is really important, and so use state lets you pass in default value, and the default value is going to be the initial prop that we get that gets passed in. So this is going to be our default state for page content. So let's just walk through that real quick is that, like, so we're still loading this. So what's happening is this is being fed in at the time the page is created. So we have this stale data, right? And it's being passed in as a prop. But we're using state. So we created a state variable called page content, and we're setting the default value of that to this content that's being passed in. And now inside of our render, we're referencing the state value, which is page content. So we're still getting the same output. What's important to note is now we have access to this here. So if I was to create a function called change stale, let's just call it change page content, right? And then we're gonna say content, and then in this I could say set page content, because this is when you use state, there's the value, the variable which you access, and then there's the function which you can override this. So say set page content and call this fresh content, right? I'm not calling this method, right? So it's not going to update yet. But if I was to then call this method or function, excuse me, here and change it to, I don't know why I just didn't make this dynamic here. I'm going to replace this here, say fresh content. It's not happy with me. Let's see. Looks like that triggers the state change. I think we're going to need to bring this into use effect before I actually show it. Or go like this. So save this and let's just create a button down here. On click. Change content state. And then I believe I need to go like that, maybe. Okay, cool. All right, so why we need to add this fat arrow function here is because if on render, it'll automatically execute if you don't have it trigger this call. And so if we remove this here, you run into this like endless loop error issue. So you gotta add that. So we have a button now that's going to change the content state. So note that when this page loads, it comes with this stale data. We created a function called change page content, and we had a button that's going to set that. So we click that, it changes it to fresh. So this is the first part of this, is use state to output and control the content. And why that's important is that once we use effect to update the page, we're going to replace that content as the page renders for the user using their browser. So we're going to now use the use effect hook. And let's get the use effect. And note, these are React functions. These aren't like Next.js is built in React. These are React functions. So looking at this, they show the example. In our example, we're going to tell it not to change, only run once by adding an empty bracket here. And then we're going to set this page content to at first render. Let's see what happened here. All right, cool. Okay. All right, so now when we're looking at the page, note that new content in first render. Let's make this bigger so we can all see it. H3. Cool. So this is our new content at render. And note that when the page came in, we were supposed to be loading with this stale data, but you don't even see it because it replaces itself immediately because we're not even making a request. But the idea is that the search engine is going to see this because JavaScript isn't necessarily running for the search engine. So, but JavaScript's running for the user, so when you use useEffect, this is going to execute the very first time. And when by adding it, you're telling it to not listen to any other props, which means this will just run once at the page load. And we're setting the page content to this first render. If we were to undo this, hit save and refresh, we're going to get the stale data loading from the server. We can change our state by using this button because everything's tied to this page content variable. And if we uncommented our useEffect, it's going to override this immediately, and then we could then override that again later with this change content state here. So this would be the setup. So in your useEffect, you can do your fetch request to get new data, right? And we're going to do that example here. Let's just see, fetch, and let's get a zesty route. We'll use the example we're working in, headless. And one of these, I'm going to load this looking at it with a different setup. Looks a lot cleaner like that. So we're going to let's grab this GQL endpoint here. And this has some data in it. So we'll just use this endpoint to fetch. So we're going to say fresh data. So we're going to let a URL, paste that in there, and I think we're going to need our ZPW equals 123445. Just verify that we're going to need a password to access this particular data. So let me just confirm that. Fetching. Yep, 12345, perfect. And we're going to fetch this URL. I believe we're going to need to run this fetch externally because it needs to have an await. It needs a wait syntax. So we're going to have to create another function with this await syntax. And then we're going to fetch the URL. So we say let response equals await fetch, and then let data equals await. And this would be response, and then call the JSON function on it. And now we should have access this JSON. It should be mad at me because I'm running await and a non-async function. Let's hit save here and tell me that. And then I believe I can just async this, but I don't think they want you to use async in useEffect. I think it may throw me an error. It doesn't look like it is. All right, cool. So that's running. And let's take a look at the data that we're outputting. And here's the output, and yeah, it just told me useEffect. They don't want to run async in useEffect. But we still are able to get the data, and you can see down here, it has this base here and models some generation time. So we're going to grab base and generation time. And at this point, we're going to change the data to this. So it'd be data dot, let's go look back at what our reference was again. So it's going to be data.base and data.generation time are the two values we'll grab just for examples. And let's do what they're asking for and kick this function out. Fetch fresh data. Now let's move this data, this into here. And then we'll just call fetch fresh data down here. Okay. So notice that there was a time second for it changing. So what I just did is I have a use effect. I created an asynchronous function called fetch fresh data, and I'm calling this in the use effect when the page first loads. So this would be like going back to the start. It's like, how do I start a page with the content that I want the search engine to see, but then override the page with fresh content? This would be the way it's done. So you have to use state, and you set up a state value, and the initial content you get into your props, set that as your default content. And this could be done 10, 20, 30 times, right? I'm showing one example, but you could have page content, page header, page whatever. You can use as many state options as you want. And then you're going to use effect to call an asynchronous function to get fresh data from a remote server. And what we're doing here is we have a remote URL that has JSON data. We run a fetch command. We change it to JSON, and we're logging it, which we don't need to do anymore. And then we use this state set page content function we set up to replace the content on page. Let's refresh. Okay, and did you notice that blip? Let me give it another refresh. Where like that new content at first renders there for just, it's real quick. It's there for like 2 seconds and then it's gone. It replaces itself. So this is the example of how you start with certain content and then it would replace itself. And that's using use effect. So for any of those tuning in, if you have specific questions about this, please ask in chat. If you want to see any other examples while we're looking at this, please ask in chat. I'm going to commit this and push it up as a code example. State variable. Add some comments in there. Cool. Oh, use effect is still mad because I left async here. Alright. Yeah, now we're not getting that output. Cool. Looks like there's no questions, so we're going to tie up. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on Tuesday. And thank you, everybody. Have a great day.